Welcome to the Cheating Confession Reddit channel. Today, I'm going to share with you a real-life cheating story. It will give you a better understanding of the issue of infidelity today and help you be more cautious when it comes to a cheating wife. Let's dive into this story together.
Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. From the other room, Mia's sharp voice sliced through the quiet like a blade. "Dad, where's my credit card?" Her tone carried a demanding edge, a far cry from the thoughtful daughter I once knew. "It's on the counter, same as always," I called back, though a knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't the first time her attitude had bristled against me, and I'd chalked it up to the typical trials of raising a teenager. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Moments later, Mia stormed into the room, her phone glued to her hand, her movements brisk and detached. As she passed, her expression was unreadable. "You really need to stop touching my stuff," she snapped, eyes fixed on her screen. Her words stung, but I held my tongue. Lately, this was how most of our conversations went. She collapsed onto the couch, her attention fully consumed by the glowing device in her hand. It was then I noticed her diary lying carelessly beside her. The glittering pink cover, once so fiercely protected, now sat abandoned. The sight was jarring, a symbol of how far things had shifted between us. I must have stared a beat too long because Mia's head snapped up, her glare cutting. "What are you looking at?" she demanded. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Nothing," I replied evenly, pushing down the unease rising in my chest. "Just wondering when you'll finally clean up after yourself." She rolled her eyes with exaggerated drama, grabbed the remote, and stood. "Whatever, Dad. Just stay out of my stuff, okay?" Her voice dripped with disdain as she marched to her room, punctuating her exit with a door slam that reverberated through the house. For a moment I remained frozen, the sting of her words lingering in the air. My gaze drifted back to the diary, its glitter catching the light. A tugging sense of curiosity gnawed at me, though I knew the very idea of opening it was wrong. She was my daughter, after all. But the cold distance between us, her guarded demeanor, and her cutting words whispered that something deeper was wrong. Hesitantly, I reached for the book, my hand trembling as it hovered over the cover. "This isn't right," I muttered to myself, but the thought of the wedge growing between us spurred me on. With a deep breath, I opened it. The first few pages were innocent enough. Doodles, notes about school, and fleeting mentions of friends. But as I read further, the tone shifted. My heart sank with each line. Mom's boyfriend Chris is so much cooler than Dad. He bought me a diamond bracelet yesterday. When I joked about Dad noticing, Chris just laughed and said, "He's too busy pretending to be a man to care." LOL. I gripped the pages tighter, my hands beginning to shake. Chris got me a car too, using Dad's credit card. When I asked if Mom would mind, he just smiled and said, "Your mom's too busy planning the divorce to notice." Can't wait for Dad to be out of the picture. Chris is going to be the best new dad. The words stabbed at me, each one a painful revelation. I read on, uncovering indulgent shopping sprees funded by stolen money and Mia's open disdain for me. The diary painted a vivid picture of betrayal. Laura, the woman I trusted, was conspiring with Chris, a man who'd ingratiated himself into my daughter's life. By the time I reached the final entry, my chest felt hollow. Gently, I closed the book and placed it on the coffee table. My fists clenched as anger roared through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Reacting in rage would only give them more control. "Keep it together," I whispered, breathing deeply. This wasn't a battle to be fought recklessly. If they were playing games, I would play smarter. The rest of the night passed in a haze of old memories. Mia's laughter as a child, her scraped knees, and Laura's smile on lazy Sunday mornings. Those moments felt like remnants of a life I no longer recognized. From down the hall, Mia's laughter pierced my thoughts, likely at a text from Chris or Laura. The realization made my blood boil, but I stayed composed. The next morning, as Mia breezed through the kitchen, phone in hand, I watched her carefully, She barely acknowledged me. "Morning, Dad," she said flatly. "Morning," I replied, matching her indifference. She grabbed her keys, but I'd already seen her Instagram post. "Ride or die with Chris," it read, alongside a picture of her in his Porsche. "Meeting friends today?" I asked casually. "Yeah," she replied curtly before heading out. As soon as the door closed, I sprang into action. Laura believed I was predictable and oblivious, but she didn't know the precautions I'd taken. At my laptop, I transferred funds to secure offshore accounts, canceled their credit cards, and finalized the deed transfer on our house. By the time I finished, my financial armor was impenetrable. Later, I met Williamson, a private investigator, at a diner on the edge of town. I slid a folder across the table, filled with diary excerpts and phone records. "Chris, right?" he asked, flipping through the pages. I nodded. "He's been stealing from me, driving cars I doubt he can afford, and inserting himself into my daughter's life." "What do you want me to find?" Williamson asked, his eyes sharp. "Everything," I said, my voice firm. "I want his finances, his past, anything I can use to take him down." The game had changed, but they had no idea what was coming. "I'll have the comprehensive report finalized by the end of the week," he assured me as I slid the envelope of cash across the table. As I left the diner, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying seemed to lift, replaced by a strange sense of ease I hadn't felt in weeks. Over the next several days, updates from Williamson arrived sporadically, each one more damning than the last, painting Chris as a ticking time bomb. His so-called entrepreneurial efforts were little more than a string of failed ventures propped up by gullible investors. He was drowning in debt, staying afloat only by manipulating people like Laura. Williamson even unearthed a fraud charge from years ago, something Chris had apparently hoped would remain buried forever. As the evidence accumulated, I spent evenings with Scott, my attorney, hammering out the details of the divorce paperwork. Scott was astute and direct, immediately understanding the stakes. "You're absolutely certain about taking the gloves off?" Scott asked, lowering his glasses to peer at me. "No doubt in my mind," I replied firmly. "I want her left with nothing." "She's going to fight back," he cautioned. "You've been the sole provider, and she'll come at you with everything she's got." "That's exactly why I'm acting now," I said, my tone cold and unyielding. "By the time this is over, she won't have the resources to put up a fight." Scott shook his head slightly, a faint smirk on his face. "You're not leaving her any way out, are you?" "She didn't give me a choice," I said, my voice steady. By the 5th day, Williamson called with a revelation that changed everything. "I've got a big one," he announced. "Turns out Chris has been siphoning money from a joint account he shares with your wife. She's been unknowingly funding his lifestyle." A grim smile crept across my lips. "Perfect. What about Mia? Did you find anything there?" "Nothing illegal," Williamson admitted reluctantly. "But she's been gushing to her friends about how Chris is the father she always wished she had. Oh, and apparently your credit card got maxed out on a trip to the Bahamas." My jaw tightened. That was the last straw. Mia's blind devotion to this con artist was the final insult. I waited until Saturday, knowing Laura and Chris had plans for dinner. With Mia out with her friends, the house was empty, an opportunity I couldn't waste. I laid everything out on the kitchen counter, the divorce documents, detailed evidence of Chris's financial scams, and a photo of his Porsche being towed, a move I had orchestrated earlier that day. In the center of it all, I left a simple note. "Game over. Pack your things." Then, with a small bag and my laptop, I left. The afternoon sun warmed my face as I parked my old truck in a shopping center lot, 2 rows away from Chris's precious Porsche. With sunglasses on and my cap pulled low, I watched as Chris and Mia emerged from the mall, their arms full of shopping bags. She giggled, flaunting a designer purse undoubtedly purchased with money that wasn't his, or worse, mine. Right on schedule, the repo truck arrived. The operator moved with precision, hooking the car's back wheels and beginning the tow. Mia noticed first. "Hey, what are you doing?" she yelled, dropping her bags and rushing toward the truck. "Repossession," the operator said flatly. "This car's not yours anymore." Chris hurried after her, his face flushed. What the hell? That's my car. Not according to the bank, the operator replied dryly. Payments are months overdue. Chris's protests grew more frantic as he waved his hands in frustration. This has to be a mistake. I paid last week. The operator laughed, holding up a clipboard. Sure you did. Take it up with the finance company. Step back unless you want to cause trouble. Mia's voice cut through the scene like a blade. That's my dad's car. You can't just take it. The operator raised an eyebrow. Looks like Daddy forgot to pay. Tough break. I allowed myself a quiet laugh as I watched from my truck. Chris and Mia stood frozen as the Porsche disappeared down the road, Chris kicking a nearby pole in anger. This is your fault, Chris snapped at Mia. Mine, she fired back, her face red. You're the one who couldn't pay for it. Leaning back in my seat, I felt the deep satisfaction of a small victory. Back at the house, the stage was set. Laura returned from her yoga class, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. The silence in the house caught her attention first. Hello? She called, dropping her bag. Her eyes quickly landed on the stack of papers on the counter. Divorce filings, airtight terms ensuring she walked away with nothing. Beside them were Chris's bank statements, stripped bare, and the ominous note, Game over. Pack your things. Her scream rang through the empty house, a mix of rage and disbelief. I could imagine her pacing the kitchen, her face a mask of shock. Soon her calls began. I let them go unanswered. Voicemail after voicemail followed, each more frantic and erratic than the last. You bastard, one began. You think you can just abandon us like this? You'll regret it. Another shifted tone, desperate. Please, let's talk. Don't do this. I ignored them all. Not yet. Hours later, Mia stormed into the house, slamming the door behind her. Mom, what the hell is going on? She shouted. Laura, still seething, whirled to face her. You tell me! Your father's lost his mind! Mia threw down her shopping bags. Chris's car just got repossessed! Do you know how embarrassing that was? Everyone at the mall saw! Laura's eyes widened in shock. What? How? Then realization dawned. It was him! Your father did this! Mia folded her arms, her tone icy. Well, maybe if you and Chris weren't so careless, this wouldn't have happened. Don't you dare blame me, Laura snapped. You were more than happy to go along with it. The shopping sprees, the car. Did you ever stop to wonder how it was all being paid for? Mia opened her mouth to argue, but froze when her eyes landed on the divorce papers. Picking them up, she skimmed through the contents. What's this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your father's twisted idea of revenge, Laura spat bitterly. He's trying to leave me with nothing. Mia tossed the papers back onto the counter. Good luck with that. Chris says Dad doesn't have the guts to actually go through with it. Laura dismissed my remarks with a scoff, though a flicker of doubt betrayed her confidence. Your father isn't nearly as clever as he believes, she said defiantly. I'll find a way to beat this. That evening, I finally chose to answer Laura's persistent call. You're a coward, she hissed the second I picked up. What exactly are you trying to pull? She demanded, her tone sharp and angry. Protecting what belongs to me, I responded evenly, my voice calm. Something you should have thought about before plotting behind my back. Don't act like you're some innocent victim, she snapped. You think you're so smart? You've destroyed everything. Destroyed? I repeated mockingly. No, Laura, I didn't ruin anything. That's all on you and Chris. I'm simply ensuring you face the fallout of your choices. She hesitated, clearly struggling to formulate a retort. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and deliberate. You won't get away with this. You're too late, I replied smoothly. And by the way, tell Chris he might want to start packing. Something tells me his landlord won't be thrilled when the checks stop clearing. You're vile, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. No, Laura, I countered, my tone unwavering. I'm just someone who's finally stopped letting you walk all over him. Enjoy the life you've chosen. It's what you deserve. Without giving her a chance to reply, I ended the call. The following morning, Laura and Mia awoke to chaos. A moving truck stood parked in the driveway, and 2 workers in uniform were carrying furniture out of the house piece by piece. What on earth is happening? Laura screamed, rushing outside. One of the movers handed her a clipboard. "We're repossessing the leased furniture. Payments haven't been made," he explained. Laura's face went ashen as she scanned the paperwork. "There must be some kind of mistake," she stammered. From the porch, Mia folded her arms and glared at the scene, her expression a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Seriously? This is beyond embarrassing." From a safe distance, I watched as their carefully constructed facade crumbled. The Porsche was already gone, the furniture followed, and the illusion of their perfect life disintegrated. Satisfaction was the only emotion I felt. As the movers drove away, leaving an empty house behind, Laura collapsed onto the porch steps, burying her face in her hands. Mia stood frozen beside her, her frustration etched into her silence. Without sparing them a second glance, I drove off, finally unburdened by the weight of their betrayal. 2 months slipped by. 2 months since I'd walked out and left Laura and Mia to deal with the wreckage of their decisions. I had moved to a different city, settled into a modest but comfortable home, and started rebuilding my life. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. I had severed all ties. No calls, no messages, no emails. They had no idea where I was, and I intended to keep it that way. Occasionally, I received updates from the private investigator I had hired. Chris's so-called ventures had crumbled spectacularly. His businesses turned out to be nothing more than scams riddled with unpaid debts. Creditors hounded him endlessly, and repossession teams didn't stop at the Porsche. By the end of the first month, Chris had hit rock bottom. No car, no money, no credibility. Laura had been his final lifeline, but even that unraveled. One night she called him, likely desperate for reassurance or a plan, only for him to hang up on her. Not long after, my investigator reported that Chris had skipped town, abandoning everything, including Laura. The bitter irony? She discovered she was pregnant a week after he vanished. I wasn't surprised. Men like Chris always disappear when things get tough. One quiet Sunday afternoon, the crunch of tires on gravel interrupted my solitude. I looked up from my coffee to see an old, battered sedan pull into my driveway. At first I didn't recognize it, but then the passengers stepped out. Laura emerged first, a shadow of the woman she used to be. Her hair was hastily tied back, and her clothes hung loosely over her visibly pregnant frame. Her face, worn and strained, spoke of sleepless nights and mounting stress. Mia followed, clutching a shabby bag, her head bowed. The defiance she had flaunted months ago had vanished. She now carried herself with slumped shoulders and hesitation. They stopped a few feet from my porch, unsure of how to proceed. I placed my coffee cup on the side table and leaned back in my chair. "Well, this is a surprise," I said, my tone steady. "What brings you here?" Laura hesitated, nervously wringing her hands. "We need to talk," she finally said. "Talk?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "After everything you've done, that's bold." Her composure shattered, and tears welled in her eyes. "I know I made terrible choices. I was selfish, blind. I don't even understand what I was thinking." She gestured toward Mia, who stood silently beside her. "We both know now how wrong we were. Please, just hear us out." I turned my gaze to Mia. "And you? Do you have anything to say?" Mia avoided eye contact, her voice trembling when she finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it, for the things I said, the way I treated you. I was cruel and thoughtless. I didn't mean any of it." Her voice broke as tears streamed down her face. "I miss you." I studied them both, emotions warring within me, anger, hurt, disbelief. Were their words genuine, or just born of desperation? "Do you even understand the pain you caused me?" I asked, my voice low but piercing. "Do you grasp the depth of your betrayal? Both of you?" Laura dropped to her knees, clasping her hands together as sobs racked her body. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "We'll do whatever it takes. Just let us come back." "Back?" I repeated, my tone sharp. "To the home you so eagerly destroyed? The one you conspired to replace me in with that fraud Chris? You both made your choices." Laura wept harder, clutching her belly as regret seemed to weigh her down. Mia stood paralyzed, her face streaked with tears, unable to say a word. I was blinded by the promise of something different, Laura confessed between sobs. Chris made me believe you didn't care, that you weren't enough. But I see now how wrong I was. You would never have abandoned me the way he did. I crossed my arms, unmoved. You're damn right I wouldn't have. But that didn't matter to you, did it? You wanted thrills, luxury, whatever you thought Chris could offer. And you, I added, looking directly at Mia, you happily went along with it. You lied to me, laughed at me behind my back. Why should I believe anything you're saying now? Mia's voice was barely audible. Because we've lost everything. Mom's pregnant, Chris is gone, and we have nowhere else to go. She wiped her face with trembling hands. I just want my dad back. I stared at them, the wounds they'd inflicted still raw. For months, they had treated me like I didn't matter, and now they stood before me, asking me to erase it all and take them back. Do you think life is some kind of fairy tale? My voice cut through the silence, cold and unrelenting. You believe you can waltz in, say you're sorry, and everything just magically goes back to the way it was? That's not reality. Laura stepped closer, her hand reaching out toward me, but I instinctively backed away. Her voice was trembling, barely audible. Please, I'll do anything, she whispered, desperation thick in her tone. If you want me to sign something, I will. Just don't shut us out completely. My face remained unreadable as I met her pleading gaze. And why would I settle for less? I asked, my tone flat and unforgiving. Her eyes widened, the shock evident, and beside her, Mia let out a shaky breath. You both made your choices, I continued, unflinching. You chose someone else over me. Now you'll live with that. Laura collapsed onto the porch, her sobs erupting uncontrollably as she clutched her stomach. Mia knelt beside her, tears streaking her face as she tried to console her. Without another glance, I turned and headed back to the door. Pausing briefly, I looked over my shoulder, my words deliberate and icy. The next time you play games with someone's life, I said, make sure you're ready to lose. I shut the door firmly, the sound of their crying muffled by the heavy wood. From the window, I watched them, huddled together on the porch, grief etched into their hunched forms against the dimming light of dusk. For a fleeting moment, pity stirred within me, a faint urge to reach out and comfort them. But the part of me that bore the weight of their betrayal kept me rooted. Eventually, they left. I stood by the window until the red glow of their taillights faded into the night. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a strange sense of finality. They were left to face the consequences of their actions, and whatever came next was no longer my burden. Turning from the window, I picked up my coffee and stepped back onto the porch. The breeze carried the sound of rustling leaves, soothing in its simplicity. For the first time in months, I let a small, tentative smile cross my face. Life, I realized, was finally mine again. The days that followed their visit passed uneventfully. Their faces, Laura's tear-streaked anguish and Mia's guilt-ridden sorrow, lingered in my thoughts. Yet surprisingly, the encounter didn't reopen old wounds. Instead, it felt like the final chapter to a story I had already closed. Their betrayal had cut deeply, but in its wake, I had found something I didn't expect: freedom. They were no longer my responsibility. I had made peace with leaving them behind. Work became my refuge, a space where purpose and routine filled the hours. My projects consumed my days, leaving little room for lingering doubts. Evenings, though, were a different matter. Sitting alone on the porch, drink in hand, I would watch the trees sway in the wind and wonder if trust would ever feel safe again. It was on one of those quiet evenings that I first met her. A soft clink of glass caught my attention, and I turned to see a woman standing at the edge of my porch. She looked to be in her early 40s, her smile warm and disarming. In her hands was a plate of cookies. "Hi," she said brightly. "I'm Rachel, just moved in across the street." I hesitated before standing. "Nice to meet you, Rachel." "I thought I'd introduce myself the old-fashioned way," she said, holding out the plate. "I wasn't sure if you preferred chocolate chip or oatmeal raisin, so I made both." A laugh escaped me, unexpected and genuine. "Chocolate chip, definitely." She handed me the plate and leaned casually against the railing, taking in the view. "You've got a nice setup here. Quiet, peaceful. I'm guessing you like your space?" "Something like that," I replied cautiously. Her smile didn't falter. "Don't worry, I'm not here to invade your life. Just thought I'd say hello and maybe see if I could talk you into joining me for dinner sometime. No pressure." Her sincerity was refreshing, a straightforward kindness without any hidden agenda. "Thanks for the cookies," I said after a moment. "Dinner sounds nice. Let me know when." Dinner led to more dinners, and over time, Rachel's easy warmth began to chip away at the walls I had built. She wasn't without her own struggles. She spoke openly about her divorce and the challenges of starting over with her teenage son, Ethan. One evening, as we sat on her deck watching the sunset, she asked about my past. "You don't have to share," she said gently, "but sometimes it helps." I stared at the horizon, memories weighing heavily on me before I finally spoke. My wife, ex-wife, had an affair, but it wasn't just that. She manipulated my daughter against me, made me feel invisible in my own family. I took a deep breath. When I found out, it broke me, so I left. Rachel nodded, her gaze steady and understanding. "That kind of betrayal leaves scars," she said quietly. "It makes you question everything." "It does," I admitted. "But in a strange way, it forced me to rediscover myself, what I want, who I am, and who deserves a place in my life." Her smile was soft. "And who are you letting in now?" I met her eyes, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "Someone who understands what it means to start over." As my connection with Rachel deepened, so did my bond with Ethan. Initially guarded, the teenager slowly opened up, especially when we bonded over shared interests like classic cars and hiking. Those moments reminded me of what it felt like to belong to a family again. 6 months into my relationship with Rachel, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope made my chest tighten. It was from Mia. The note inside was brief but heartfelt. "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I hope you can. I've been seeing a therapist to understand why I acted the way I did. Mom and I are doing better, but I know things will never be the same. I want you to know I love you. I always have, even when I didn't show it. Mia." I read the letter twice, emotions surging, anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. But I didn't respond. Not yet. That evening, Rachel noticed my silence as we prepared dinner. "Something on your mind?" she asked. Wordlessly, I handed her the letter. She read it carefully, then set it down. "Do you believe her?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to, but part of me can't forget." Rachel offered me a comforting smile, her gaze steady and understanding. "There's no need to rush into anything. Healing is a process, and it unfolds differently for everyone," she assured me. Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after that moment. Over the following weeks, Mia's letter remained a persistent thought. I didn't write back, but I couldn't discard it either. It sat on my desk, a subtle reminder that moving on doesn't always mean slamming doors shut. Rachel had taught me that. She never demanded answers or steered me in any direction. Instead, she provided steady, reliable support. One crisp autumn day, the three of us, Rachel, Ethan, and I, strolled through the park. The trees were a vibrant tapestry of reds and yellows, and the cool air carried a sense of renewal that mirrored my own inner peace. "Hey, Mike," Ethan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Are you coming to the car show with us next weekend? Mom said you used to own a Mustang." I chuckled, a faint grin spreading across my face. "I did. And yes, I'll be there. Maybe I'll teach you a thing or two about real cars." Ethan smirked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Yeah, right. I probably know more about cars than you do." Rachel's laughter bubbled up as she slid her hand into mine. "Watch out, Ethan. He just might put that claim to the test." I gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a warmth spreading through me that felt like home. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't clouded by pain or regret. The betrayals and heartbreaks that once consumed me were no longer the defining elements of my story. Laura and Mia had left their marks, but those scars were now symbols of strength and growth. The hurt they caused had been profound, but it had also been transformative. Standing at the edge of this new chapter, I felt something I hadn't dared to embrace in years. Hope. The chaos of the past, the betrayals, the bitterness, the fallout, had receded into the background, a distant memory I no longer needed to revisit. From time to time, bits of news about Laura and Mia reached me. I didn't actively seek out information about their lives, but snippets occasionally found their way to me through mutual acquaintances. Laura, it seemed, was raising her child alone after Chris vanished shortly after learning of the pregnancy. She was juggling 2 jobs, one as a waitress and another as a motel receptionist. I could imagine the weariness etched on her face, the weight of her choices evident in every line. Mia, now in her mid-20s, had moved out and was living independently. She and Laura had parted ways years ago after a disagreement over money. The last I'd heard, she was working retail, barely scraping by. College had been left unfinished, and the arrogance she once carried had been replaced with resentment and regret. One evening, Rachel and I sat in our backyard, the golden hues of the setting sun enveloping the garden. This space had become our sanctuary, a place where we could unwind together. She poured us each a glass of wine and settled beside me. "You've been quiet tonight," she observed gently. I swirled the wine in my glass, savoring its aroma before responding. "I heard something about Laura and Mia today," I admitted. Her expression softened, her curiosity tempered by patience. "What did you hear?" she asked, her voice warm and inviting. "A friend mentioned that Laura's struggling to get by and that Mia isn't doing much better," I said. Rachel placed her glass down, leaning in slightly. "How does that make you feel?" she asked with quiet interest. I took a moment to consider. I'm not angry anymore. There was a time when hearing that would have felt vindicating, but now it just feels sad. Her fingers found mine, weaving together in a gesture of quiet solidarity. "That says so much about how far you've come," she said with a tender smile. "You've created a life they can't touch." Her words grounded me. She was right. My life was no longer tethered to the pain of the past, but defined by the joy and purpose I had cultivated. The next day, as I worked on restoring an old Mustang in my garage, Ethan appeared at the doorway. Now a college student studying engineering, he had grown into a confident young man far removed from the shy teenager I'd first met. "Hey, Mike," he called out, leaning casually against the frame. "Got a minute?" "Always," I replied, wiping my hands clean. "What's up?" He hesitated before stepping inside. "Mom mentioned you'd heard about your ex-wife and daughter," he began. I nodded. "Word gets around," I said simply. Ethan crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. "Do you ever think about reaching out, especially to Mia?" His question lingered in the air. "I've thought about it," I admitted. "But some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Mia made her choices and I made mine. If she truly wanted to talk, she knows how to find me." He considered my words before nodding. "I guess that makes sense. I think about what I'd do if I ever lost you or Mom. It's hard to imagine not trying to fix things." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Relationships are complex, Ethan. Sometimes they can't be repaired, not because there's no love, but because the damage is too great. And that's okay. You move forward and focus on those who value you." He seemed to weigh my words carefully before nodding again. "Thanks, Mike. That helps." In the years that followed, my life blossomed. Rachel and I celebrated our 5th anniversary in Tuscany, a dream I never thought possible. We traveled often, exploring places I'd only seen in magazines. I even turned my passion for classic cars into a thriving restoration business. Ethan worked with me during his summers, and I often joked that he'd take over one day. One afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork, I stumbled across Mia's letter. It had been buried for years, forgotten beneath the clutter. Unfolding it, I read her words again. This time, they carried no sting, only a sense of closure. Rachel walked in, noticing the letter in my hands. "Is that from her?" she asked softly. I nodded. "It is. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just feels like a part of my story." Rachel smiled and sat beside me. "That's because you've healed," she said gently. "You've built a life that stands on its own." Folding the letter, I placed it back in the drawer. "You're right, I have." Years later at a charity event, I ran into an old acquaintance who mentioned seeing Laura. He described her as tired, worn down by life. "Do you ever talk to her?" he asked. "No," I said simply. "And Mia?" he pressed. I paused. "No, but I hope she's found her way." There was no bitterness in my words, only quiet acceptance. Some people change, others remain the same. I had spent enough time trying to salvage relationships that weren't meant to be saved. Now, I knew better. On a sunny afternoon, Rachel and I sat on the porch, watching our grandchildren play in the yard. My son-in-law called out for grilling advice while my daughter-in-law teased him about burning the burgers. Rachel turned to me, her eyes filled with warmth. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked softly. I didn't need clarification. "Not often," I replied honestly. "But when I do, it's with hope. Hope that they've learned, grown, and found happiness." She rested her hand on mine, and I smiled. Revenge had once seemed like the answer, but love, resilience, and dignity had defined my life. Laura and Mia had tried to break me, but in the end, they only fractured themselves. And me? I thrived. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.